One of the first things I had to appreciate about Invincible is just how much more serious and mature the writing is than most adult cartoons we get these days. And that's partly because, again, it's an action cartoon and a comic book cartoon that is entirely made for adults, which is just a rarity in general. But more than that, the drama is so sophisticated and complex, particularly in how Cecil is characterized from the get-go. He's easily my favorite character in this whole bunch. He already deduces from the start that it was Omni-Man's doing, but it's never made clear to the viewer that he's well aware of this until much later. His actions speak louder than his words do. The interesting thing about Cecil is how fast he figures out that it was Omni-Man all along. When I first watched this, I couldn't really tell if he actually knew or just didn't care, but it was an intentional front he put up in order to buy time and avoid Omni-Man suspecting that he knows the truth. Cecil was the first person to figure it out, and simply chose to remain silent about it because he needed to come up with a feasible strategy in handling it properly. He's a calculating man, and he has probably the most interesting philosophy in the entire series. There are a lot of moments in Invincible that subtly set up things that come into play much later, like the monster that Omni-Man struggles to defeat off-screen that later becomes a final boss towards the end of the season. It is disappointing that we only hear it gave Omni-Man trouble from word of mouth, but I also think this brings in the element of surprise once the monster actually appears. It's also just emblematic of Cecil's resourcefulness once again. He'll put anything to use, finding value in things that most people would simply avoid out of fear. At a certain point in the series, he tries to get Omni-Man off the planet by having him protect the astronauts headed to Mars. Though he claims that it's in order to ensure their safety, the real purpose is to have Omni-Man gone so that he can investigate things more thoroughly, but instead he ends up sending Invincible, seeing it as an opportunity to get to see what this kid's made of, and if he might serve as a helpful replacement for Omni-Man. It also puts into perspective Omni-Man's questionable ideals. He uses the typical needs of the many argument to justify not going, but the real reason he won't leave is because of his intentions with Earth. If his objective is world domination, then he doesn't really see the purpose in leaving, even if it's just for a few weeks. But it also puts into perspective Mark's ignorance as well, since he doesn't even know how long it would take to fly to Mars to begin with. Damian Darkblood continues investigating Omni-Man, even after Cecil told him to drop it, so it leaves him no choice but to exorcise the demon and send him right back to hell. And during this scene, he actually summarizes his own philosophy quite well.
That's the problem with demons. You only see good and evil, black and white. Well, I need to keep things gray.
Cecil has to be strategic, because this job requires a lot of difficult decisions. He can't take any risks, and it would be useless to go after Omni-Man without a plan of attack. He's too smart and way too powerful. The best thing he can do, for the time being, is buy himself a little more time and try to gather up as many resources as he possibly can to stop him. Cecil is a cautious man, and he always makes difficult decisions that are hard to swallow because he's used to all this. It's why he's not afraid of Omni-Man. It's why he knew he was the culprit from the get-go, but said absolutely nothing about it. This leads into the second to last episode, in which Cecil and Omni-Man face off, and this is actually one of the most brilliantly done battles I've seen in the entire series. Basically, Cecil mocks him repeatedly, using his teleporter to get out before Omni-Man can do any damage to him. Then he sends whatever weapons he has available towards Omni-Man, hoping any of them can at least hurt him.
$400 billion for the world's most expensive nosebleed.
It's brilliant, because it juxtaposes Omni-Man's raw power to Cecil's political power, and also shows that his resourcefulness is actually his greatest strength. He's not entirely helpless, even if Omni-Man might be an incredibly powerful soldier. At one point, Cecil fires a laser, sacrificing various wildlife and damaging someone's nearby cabin, considering these things a small price to pay for the sake of the goal. He's desperate, sure, but these decisions were not easy to make. He considers them necessary for the sake of his gamble, and his utilitarian philosophy only becomes more clear as this fight goes on. The back-and-forth dialogue between Cecil and Omni-Man is so well written and so impactful because it gives you so much insight into Cecil's worldview. This can be seen again when he sends some dead soldiers, revealed to be brought back to life by that incel character from a previous episode. After discovering him and his talents, he decides they won't go to waste, but also makes it clear that he doesn't support this man's action. He still acknowledges that he's a serial killer, and almost feels slight shame in having to use his talents, even if it means utilizing the aptitude of a monster, psychopath, and freak. He's still willing to throw anything he can at Omni-Man, finding value in those skills and weaponizing them for the sake of his own goals. But when these things don't work, he finally decides to use that monster we spoke about earlier, which is paired with probably the most badass monologue we've seen yet. He talks about how Omni-Man has already defeated it, but now they've upgraded the beast with every combat enhancement in their arsenal, how all of that really pissed it off, and now it blames Omni-Man. It's the most effective tool he uses, and it almost seems to kill him. Even when Mark, who naively has no idea who his father is, steps in to stop the beast, it seems like the two of them might be killed. Debbie demands that he calls the beast off, and Cecil refuses. He states that he has no idea if Mark is with or against his father, and can't call off the one thing that might be able to stop them both. But he also admits that he isn't proud of this, that he hates being like this. It's just what he's learned after so many years on the Force. It's better to sacrifice both Mark and Omni-Man than it is to continue letting a powerful threat like Omni-Man keep living. Cecil is a man who never takes any chances. His brilliant mind sees the resourcefulness in everything, even if those things are heinous or evil. He didn't make it this far being a good person, and he's willing to accept that sometimes you have to embrace cruelty in order to stay on top. But even so, he doesn't do it without a good reason. Cecil is someone who values the needs of the many over the needs of the few. All of his actions are motivated by a desire to protect others, even if it means letting a few people die in order to gain the upper hand. Make a friend of horror. Find use in the most evil people imaginable. Sometimes the only way to truly defeat evil is to get your own hands dirty, and Cecil accepts this responsibility with great shame.